Welcome to take 2 of my Easter message. I was gutted this afternoon when I recorded the whole thing in the church garden, only to find out that the audio was really bad. The passing cars and lawnmowers were louder than my voice. But John Peary, big shout out to John, has built me a green screen for my office, so I can now be anywhere I want. And you will always be able to hear me. In fact, this afternoon's disaster helped me experience what I want to talk to you about now. I'm calling my message Dealing with Disappointment. Now, that might not sound a particularly inspiring title for Easter, but this is a message of hope, because God not only deals with our disappointments, but He transforms them with His hope, His good news, His new life. But if you and I are going to deal with our disappointment, we first need to acknowledge it. It is real. Now, people can live with disappointments for all kinds of reasons, but the COVID-19 pandemic is bringing about many. Business plans torn up and put in the bin, international travel cancelled, family reunions postponed, and even Easter church services happening in a strange online world. But the other thing that I'm noticing about the lockdown, and I wonder whether you've noticed it too, is that it can bring to the surface in ourselves issues and disappointments that aren't due to coronavirus at all, but they're the things that have been lurking within us, and they start to bubble to the surface when we've got time on our hands. Maybe we find ourselves responding harshly to family members in our bubble. Or maybe you find your mind going back to that job redundancy that left you feeling hollow, or unresolved issues in a relationship or a marriage. Whatever it is, I want to say to you, God can transform it with the good news of Easter. He transformed a blood-stained body wrapped and laid in a tomb into glorious new life, so He can transform our worst failures and disappointments. To help us get our heads round this, I'm going to take us to a passage from the Bible that tells us what happened on the very first Easter Sunday. Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem on the Friday. He'd been left in the tomb all of Saturday. On Sunday morning, reports got out about the tomb being empty, but 2 of Jesus' friends decided that it sounded like a load of rubbish, and they were off back home to their hometown of Emmaus. I'm going to read their story. It's found in the Bible, Luke chapter 4 and verse 13. Now that same day 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus Himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing Him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Clopas, asked Him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" He asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed Him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified Him. But we had hoped that He was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what's more, it's the 3rd day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find His body. They came and told us that they'd seen a vision of angels who said He was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women said, but they did not see Jesus." You can almost hear the disappointment in their voices and imagine their body language with their faces downcast. They'd been to Jerusalem for the Passover festival with the one they thought was the Messiah, God's chosen one, and now they were trudging home sorely disappointed. This was not just the worst Passover they'd ever been to. It was the crushing of all their hopes of the past 3 years. And what does Jesus do? What does he say? He challenges them. They haven't recognized who he is yet, but he speaks some stern words to jolt them out of their self-centered mope. I remember when, as a young man, I was moping in my own self-centered disappointment, and someone said to me, "Matt, maybe you just need to rejoice with those who rejoice." Now, the words stung at the time, but I can remember them all these years later. So here are Jesus' words of challenge, verses 25 to 27. He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Does Jesus need to challenge us? Does he need to challenge us to realign our priorities and our way of seeing things? Maybe the disappointments we're experiencing need to be seen from a different angle. I'm always struck by Christians in the poorest parts of the world who have so little and yet have joy. Why is that? Well, because they know the Messiah Jesus who suffered but who now shines with glory. I think of my friend Francis in South Sudan, who grew up there during the Civil War, when kids had no education apart from learning how to fire a gun. And I think of his smile and his love for Jesus and for others. Now, we'd love to know the full conversation that Jesus had with those two friends on the road to Emmaus. We've only got these snippets, but we do know that it made a deep impression on them. The key moment comes through towards the end of the journey, when the friends invite Jesus into their home. Verse 28. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it's nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. They still don't recognize who he is at this point, but they do know that he's got something that they desperately want, and so they invite him in. Maybe you've known Jesus for years, or maybe you don't yet know him by name. But I want you to encourage you, whoever you are, to invite him in. Invite him into your home, into your bubble, into your disappointments. Invite him into your future. What does that actually mean in practice, though, you might want to ask me? That's the sort of thing, Matt, that preachers say often: invite Jesus into your life. But what does it mean? Well, I want to suggest that it involves 3 things. Firstly, it means my disappointments and my failures are real. I cannot keep papering over the cracks. I need to acknowledge them before God. Secondly, it means I cannot find true peace and strength on my own. I need new life which comes from outside of me, outside of my bubble, and which is more powerful than the darkness within. And thirdly, this is not a quick fix. It's not a one-time prayer or panacea. It's the start of a new way of life. It's learning to see things God's way, which may be very different to our way of seeing things or the way we've grown accustomed to living our lives. You see, when we invite Jesus into our life in these 3 ways, the whole of our life will eventually be transformed. The story of the 2 friends concludes with Jesus entering their home, and as they share a meal with him, their eyes are finally opened. Let me read from verse 30. When Jesus was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" This is what it's all been building up to. They recognize him. Jesus is really alive. They'd been cynical and downcast. Now they finally see that it's true. God's power has overcome death. The bit that gets me interested, though, is where they say that their hearts had been burning within them as they walked on the road with Jesus. That conversation had brought up strong emotions and feelings for them. And I want to encourage us to pay attention to our emotions during this strange time of lockdown. You see, I've come to learn that more often than not, our feelings provide an opportunity for us to consider what God is saying to us. Now, as a bloke, sometimes I'm a bit sort of ambivalent about feelings. But actually, this is real stuff. I'm not thinking warm fuzzies or beautiful sunsets here. I'm actually saying that it's in our brokenness, in our disappointments, in the stuff that we don't share with other people. It's in all of that that we really get to engage with God. How is he asking us to realign ourselves with his purposes? Well, it's in our disappointments that we find him speaking to us most clearly. For he is stronger than all our disappointments and stronger than all of our fears. So to finish up, I've got some questions for you to consider. First of all, where have you experienced disappointment this week? And secondly, what would it mean to invite the risen Jesus into those disappointments? Now, I want you to take some time to think about those first two questions. So maybe pause the video now and take some time to reflect. But I've got a third question for you as well. Who could you share this message of hope with? There are plenty of people out there who are struggling with disappointments, and you know some of them. If you're watching this on Facebook or YouTube, I encourage you to forward or share the link to someone who could benefit from hearing it, or just share it on your timeline so others can find it. Also, I want to remind you about the Hope Project 10-day challenge. If you're new to Christianity, or if you want a refresher on the basics of what it means to have a relationship with God, then I don't think you can find a better resource to access from your bubble than 10daychallenge.co.nz. Get online and check it out. Thanks so much for listening to my Easter message. Alleluia! Christ is risen.